Hello and welcome to Hare in the Hawthorn. My name's Kate Ray and I am your host. Here we talk about anything strange, supernatural, paranormal with a fairy slant. And I'm really pleased that we have a returning guest and somebody I deeply admire for the work that he puts out. And no matter what he puts on his blog site, he literally blows my mind. And I kind of go through his work going, got to look into that more. One thing he did put on a couple of months ago, I think, um, sort of made me say, yes, we need him back on. I need to chat to him about this because this is a subject area that I'm super into. I would say excited, but it seems a bit weird using the word excited, and you'll find out a little bit more in a minute. So I'm going to pass you over to today's guest, David Halpin, who is going to introduce himself because his biography is fantastic. And I don't think I do it justice. So welcome, David, and thank you for coming along.
Thanks very much, Kate. It's great to be back again. As you say, there are so many aspects to fairy lore and fairy tradition, and an awful lot of it is not actually out in the open, which is probably what we'll get into in this episode. But just as a brief introduction, yeah, I have a blog called Circle Stories. It's on Facebook mostly. I'm on Instagram as well with extra photos, less writing. And I wanted to really write about fairy lore from a perspective that I didn't think was excavated enough, certainly here in Ireland. I know in Europe, they probably do go into darker aspects more than we did. So that's where Circle Stories came from. And over the course of the 10 years that it's been going, I've met lots of really great people like yourself, and we all seem to be converging on this subject and bringing it out into the open more than it has been, I feel. And I think what's great is a lot of us coming from these areas, like I've mentioned before, like Thomas Sheridan, for example, would have had a great occult knowledge, and that was really something that
Mm,
was missing from Irish folklore. I felt people like Neil and yourself were bringing in folklore and also the psychology and the aspects of consciousness, which I again felt wasn't really out there. And for yourself, Kate, with your own paranormal research, landscape, and I think landscape is actually going to be tied into
mm,
this subject in a big way. You know,
mm.
so that's a brief intro into where I'm coming from.
Oh, that's brilliant. I've got to say before I forget, I have meant to say this before that Circle Stories definitely needs to be in publication. I think even just in the not short snippets, but there'll be short snippets in a publication sense, but those that go out on Facebook, it would be such a shame to kind of lose them in the midst of social media. And for one, would love to be able to sit down with a book with all of those in, with the beautiful artwork as well that you choose. And I know that would be tricky on the artwork side.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
just thought I'd chuck that over your fence and say, get a book out there of it.
I know. Look, it is something that I will do. It's just really time,
Mm,
yourself. It's hard to find time to get blogs out. Never mind then to do a physical book and put marketing, put work
yeah.
into marketing and so on. But look, it's not just on Facebook. I do have backups of everything I've written. So if
Mhm.
anything ever happened, it's there, and people can do something. I'll be
Yeah.
calling for help from the other side. Get that published. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, you never, like I say, you never fail with that blog to always make me think and things tick over. And I love the fact that you aren't afraid to delve into, I suppose, where I believe the truth lies with fairies, particularly witches. You cannot get into fairies without really delving into the dark with them. And I think that that's something, like you say, that has been a taboo for a very, very long time about, obviously with, previous traditions of you don't talk ill of them, you don't talk of them, and then going into this Tinkerbell realm of they're all sweet love and light. And it seems like we are swinging, to that depth diving. And one of the articles that you put out there that I just went, whoa, this is brilliant. This is my territory, was fairy possession. Now, just that word, obviously for a paranormal investigator, that, it's invocative of demonic possession. Could you talk us through what fairy possession is?
sure. Well, you mentioned demonic possession, and I for one, do think there's a connection there. Simply, if we think about the type of beings we're talking about and how often they were identified in this way. I mean, one of the most popular origin stories for fairies here in Ireland was that like they weren't good enough for heaven and they weren't bad enough for hell. So straight away you have that the angel demon split. Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? Now, having said all of that, when it comes to possession, there's a difference between possession and changelings. And so
mm,
I'll just mention that at the start because with changelings, it's often the case that there's a physical swap,
yeah.
and that swap may be um, a child that looks the same as the human child, but when the spell is broken, it may turn out to be an object. It could be a piece of wood. It could be a really old fairy who's just, in the human realm for whatever reasons. And then you usually they would give themselves away by being too good at something. A
Mm,
baby might pick up a fiddle and play this amazing tune, or there's much darker aspect then, of course, with trying to find out change who's a changeling, because unfortunately you go into the realm then of torture and almost like an exorcism sometimes.
mm,
But with fairy possession, it's different. It can be both negative and positive, and it's important again to distinguish here. For positive, I would say if you look at the work of Dr. Eva Pox, who wrote a lot about Balkan folklore, sorry, Balkan fairy lore, and she talks about how fairies would take people in their mind. So their physical body would still be here in the human world, and their consciousness, their mind, would be taken to the fairy world. And the reason for that was in order to teach them about herbs, about the moon cycles, about divining prophecy. And then these people would come back, but they would always be referred to as being fairies. And that's interesting because people around them then were making that kind of distinction that hang on a second, there's a human form here, but there's some kind of connection to
mm,
the other world. And it's funny, Dr. Pox also talks about the fact that demonic possession would have the same background. Somehow, a being that was able to traverse the human world and cross back into whatever the the other world is,
mm,
was coming and going. So there was a danger there, and there was a respect there as well, of course, because if this person was going on to be the shaman or the witch or the healer, then of course that commands fear, respect, and so on. Now, with these people, that's someone who is chosen by fairies and who has a particular task that they have to carry out. If they said no to that task, it is recorded that something awful would befall them. It's like like the Godfather, like that this
mm,
quote about like a gift that you can't refuse or whatever. So
mm,
these people were chosen for whatever reason. There are different theories on that, and they basically lived then between the human world and the fairy world. It's when it comes to possession, I think there was something very um, ritualistic about it because in order to go back into the fairy world again, they would have their whatever psychedelics or their chanting, and it was very much something that they would do. They would carry out for a person. Now, there's a darker side of fairy possession then, where a person may not want this type of invasive consciousness for whatever reason a fairy chooses to come into our world. I suppose that comes down to what you think fairies are in terms of the non-material nature versus the physical nature. Some people will say, well, they come to our world because they want to experience things like, and we can get dark with this, they want to experience sex, they want to experience um, debauchery, they want to all of the physical pleasures of the material world that somehow they're not able to have on the other side. Now, if there was a professor, what was his name? Itzhak Bentov, and he wrote about the fact that around the Earth, on the lower levels of the dimensions, as he put it, you had these types of hungry ghosts, if you like, and it ties into that concept, which is famous mostly in Buddhism, I suppose. And it's basically the souls of people who didn't want to die and didn't go on to the next level. They were drawn to the physical world still because of pleasure, because of love, because of revenge, hate, whatever. So there's a tie in there because they would take over people in order to re-experience those physical pleasures again. But with fairy possession, what can also happen is a person can go to an ancient site and they may not have protected themselves, or they may have gone at a time that they shouldn't have gone. And sometimes they will get a fairy dart or, elf shot, and that can bring about illness and so on. But what can also happen is they can attract something to them,
Mm.
and then suddenly they can have knowledge that they don't want. They can be carrying out tasks that they don't know why they're carrying them out. The whole personality changes. And like I'm talking about this as a generalization, but you can find all of these anecdotes and folklore in records from not just Ireland, but UK, Europe, Australia, the Americas, and so on. So it's something that tends to be recorded everywhere, and yet still it's not quite spoken about in the same way as other attributes of fairies. Do you know what I mean by
Mm.
that?
Mm.
So,
Mm.
so that's. I'll let you speak now, Kate, because I've gone on there for a second. But
There is so much to unpack from that. I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is when you were speaking about those who agree to having that and going off into fairyland in their mind. That instantly is and the case of Anne Jeffreys, isn't it? And that she chose to have interactions with fairies and came back as this fairy witch, as a healer. And there is a lot of talk, and with my kind of material head on, there's a lot of talk about did she suffer from some kind of partial seizure, a partial epileptic seizure. And that was the explanation for it. And I know that there are lots of different writings about ancient times where people would have epilepsy and have these epiphanies and become seers, etc. So that's the first part. That was the first sort of thought. The second bit that because I do want to go dark with you to unpack is when we talk about demonic possession, there is a certain set of criteria that exists that will put it within possession. So, it's oppression up until a certain point. And I know that historically parapsychologists have said, and the church have said, that they will only review something as a case of possession if there's levitation involved. That's when they know, bang, we've got a possession. Is there some kind, and I doubt whether there is, but I'm going to put it out there. Is there some kind of criteria that that would that would say, yes, this is definitely a signature fairy possession?
I'm not really sure that we can come to such a conclusion, and I'll tell you why. It's because we keep redefining these experiences based on the as our knowledge evolves. We can look back and we can go, oh yeah, look, there are trademarks here of this. This person didn't just become psychologically changed. They went somewhere at a certain time, as I mentioned. Oh, it was a particular moon phase or a particular star or sorry, constellation was in the sky. And there's so much lost when
Mm.
it comes to Irish fairy lore as well. That and like I have written about it, like that connection to stars is overlooked, I think, and there has to be something there, whether it's coded into the mythology or the folklore, I don't know. But I, I was rereading Joshua Cutchin's book again, the
Mm.
second part where he's talking about sorry, it's the book is the Ecology of Souls, and he's talking about um, how kind of psychopomps are manifesting as UFOs,
Yes.
okay? And you see that then and you go, okay then, but sometimes it's orbs of light and suddenly you're in territory again, which is more fairy than anything else. Now, what I notice about that is, and it plays into the trickster aspect of fairies. And again, just I haven't forgotten your question. How do we recognize um, fairy possession. I think the very trickster nature of fairies means that even if there was a trademark, they wouldn't let us know. I think it would be hidden for whatever purpose. I don't know. Um, Often there was a fear that if people died in a certain way or at a certain time, um, they could be taken by the fairies. And then often in Irish folklore, you can find stories of a person being seen with the fairies at a rath or a stone circle just after they died. Now, what may also be happening there is the fairies are mimicking that person in order to influence the community to show that, oh, when you die, you come to us. Because that would be really powerful as there's an animosity between fairies and the church in Irish folklore.
Mm.
So what better way to undermine the church than to say, look, you can go to church, you can go to mass, but when you die, you come to us. So I just, yourself, like that's why we love this subject. I don't know if we can track a fairy possession from a demonic possession. Um, Certainly in Ireland, because so much was taboo, it's difficult to find anything. We can sense things and we can make guesses, but we don't have a specific list of this is fairy possession, as far as I know, anyway.
Mm. I know that talking about that they were, and it is a lost art of fairy doctors who would specifically go out to see people who were under the influence of fairies, and that's just something that's coming into the mainstream light, isn't it now, about
Yeah.
people who work with, and you have places, like Saudi Arabia, where they still use those kind of, even within the medical practice, they'll use fairy doctors to help people through medical issues. Where am I going with this?
Well,
What do we
yeah,
know about? Go on,
it's
go on.
funny because then that would bring us back to changelings again and the way fairy
Mm,
doctors would and sometimes the Banfassa or whoever would be asked to tell whether or not a child had been changed. And again, it comes to that grey area then, between changelings and a person who is possessed. And, it's funny, just something that's very much tied into this is Dennis Gatten's book. I think it's called Running with the Fairies. And he interviews people in that book who say that they were fairies, but now they're reincarnated as humans. And they have memories of when they were a fairy and so on. So that's something else because it means then that we have this crossing over. And why? Why would that be? I suppose in an animist universe, it makes sense, but I don't know. It's another ingredient in that mix that, where there's something otherworldly within a human body and it has that knowledge. So therefore, straight away, it's more powerful and has that charisma, maybe that ordinary people don't. I'm
mm,
sure yourself. Like if you meet if you go to certain gatherings and so on, you may come across a person and you just go, that person is not quite what they seem to be,
yeah.
So don't, I don't know. Maybe you just become paranoid, but certainly people do allude to uh, not quite being the same as me and you sometimes, or at least having such knowledge that it elevates them onto a different type of consciousness, maybe.
Definitely. I mean, could that be as well? With knowing about the trickster nature of fairies, it just begs the question of, is it reincarnation, or have they had a partial possession? Are they, partially entertained by the energy of a fairy,
Hmm.
um, that is trying to come through onto? Because I see people like there's, is it Aurora? Is that a name? She's a singer. I think she's Scandinavian, and
Okay.
I watch her, and I just think you are not of this world. There is
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah,
She is very tricksy and she's very playful, but she's also a bit kind of not mean, but a bit on the edge. But she's very
yeah, yeah,
sweet. She is pure pixie,
yeah.
and I just think there is something overlaying the human here.
Yeah, yeah, and that reminds me of, I don't know whether you've read Anne Rice's books, the Vampire Chronicles, with
Oh, of
Lestat
course.
and interviews the
Yeah.
vampire and so on. And of course, in the second one, I think it was where Lestat becomes a rock star himself, and
Yes.
he has that. Some people recognize. Some people are like, wait a minute, there's something about this guy, and
Mm,
it's like no matter how much he tries to hide his non-human uh, form, if you feel, or status, it comes through, and it reminds me too of that parallel between fairies and vampires,
yes.
and it does very much tie into possession because the vampire has their helpers, their Renfields, their um hypnotic ability to make people do things that they don't remember doing. And of course, it's the passing of blood, which is another dark aspect.
Mm,
Once that's taken, the person then is more or less possessed by this vampire, and there's a connection there between all of the servants and helpers, and some people that even though the vampire may not choose them, they want to be chosen. So they're
yeah.
in thrall as well. And of course, with fairies underground and mounds, vampires underground, you don't take food from fairies, you don't take the blood of the vampire, otherwise you're. So there are all these kinds of parallels again, linking back to possession. It's almost as if they're different faces of the same
Mm,
warning, you know?
yeah. Yeah. I totally believe that. I was speaking this weekend to people about, for me, no matter what discipline people are in within the supernatural and the paranormal, whether it's cryptid, whether it's ghost hunting, wherever you are, everything for me, the motifs always lead back to fairy. You know, there is just such strong motifs, but that for me is because we have moved away and segregated all these things when at one point they would have been under the banner of other. And that's what fairy for me means. It means other. You were saying about the vampires, you have the glamour of the vampires where they can enchant people, and that magical aspect of them. I mean, there's talk now about Sasquatch and Bigfoot being in that realm, because they can flick it in and out energetically. They live very fairy. They're quite trickster-esque. It's all those elements. But it just blows my mind that the further down you get the fronds of the tree, the more you realize it is the same tree, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
all of the
that
same tree.
that's a really good way of putting it. All right, and as you're talking about those different faces, and another really worldwide one, I suppose, is the Lady in White, which
Mm,
today, like, people will automatically assume is Mary, or that, or goddess figure, and yet this white figure has that ability. If we go to Fatima, or we go to even more recently in Medjugorje, the people that she's appearing to see her, hear her, and yet those outside of this
mm,
small, I don't even know what you'd call it, this small influence, don't see anything, but they sometimes hear things that aren't explainable, like a buzzing noise or something like that, and yet the children, it's often children who see this lady, they're getting a whole message. They're seeing her arrive in an orb. You know,
mhm.
um, Generally, if you can get to these sightings before the church gets a chance to contaminate them, you'll find that it's not really religious icons and symbols that are behind it. It's something else. It's something much more ancient, much
Mm,
more animistic and primal. And the message is sometimes, this is something that always kind of confuses me. For something that's so extraordinary, the message can be quite glib,
yeah.
and I often wonder if that's on purpose because
Mm,
you can't, for whatever reason, it's like a system disruptor, and the appearance is enough. It's going to change
yeah.
the culture. It's going to change opinions, and it may shape a society, but it's just not going to give you knowledge that lets you get too far ahead.
Mm. It would be too much overload, I think, if you were to have some big revelation after this, and one of these sort of deity-esques came down and sort of stood before you and gave you the key to humanity. I think you would just collapse and just.
Yeah,
You would die.
yeah,
You
yeah,
just wouldn't be able to cope with it.
yeah,
And again, but that shows a trickster element, doesn't it? I can be all this, I can be sort of beautiful and be miraculous to you, but I'm not going to tell you anything. It's that
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of cheeky aspect, isn't it? Which is
yeah, yeah.
brilliant. And again, it was
And
another,
do you know what? Just to interrupt you, isn't
yeah,
that
yeah,
what John Keel said? And that's why he
yes,
said it will destroy you because you will
yes,
have this miraculous vision or whatever. But when people ask you to prove it by telling them something that they can't possibly know, you can't do it, and
yes.
you end up just driven mad by the whole thing.
Yeah, totally. Again, that was a conversation I was having today, and I was saying I was trying to explain to somebody about psychics and mediums not always having a stream of consciousness on that plane, and that's because my belief is that we are material human beings having a material human existence, and if we are given too much of that spiritual, etherical, miraculous stuff, what's the point in being human? Because we may as well just be on that plane anyway. We would just be puff off the mortal coil if we knew it all. We're here to forget and remember again, aren't we? We're
Yeah, yeah.
not here to be demigods.
And I guess that's why there's the kind of barriers that are in place sometimes in terms of having to do a ritual at a certain time, having to go
Yes.
to a certain place, having to ingest something in order to open your consciousness. Because if like Colin Wilson would say, like this faculty X, which is the kind of expanded consciousness, you could only have it in small doses because otherwise
Yeah.
you just go insane.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm sure the people of a certain age will all know somebody in their group of friends who did sort of go off that on that tangent at some
yeah,
point
yeah, yeah,
from exploring those things a bit too deep, and never
yeah.
never really came back after those experiences.
No,
I just
no.
want to just go back and just explain to people because I'm explaining it because it was something that I found out myself about the word psychopomp. I'd never heard that until I read Josh's books, and Josh's books are I pick them up and go, yeah, my mind is just frazzled right now. I've got to go and look at a million words and then put it all
Mhm.
together and sort of process it. But psychopomp was one of those words I was like, oh, and then it was another layer for me. So it's beings, isn't it, that sort of chaperone people over to the other side. I think that's
Exactly.
probably
Exactly. Yes.
the
Yes.
the nutshell of it. But there are so many different elements, and again, all the elements of the psychopomps all smack of fairy, don't they? Even the Valkyries and stuff like that. It's like
Yes. Yes.
these are all fairies, aren't
Yes.
they?
Yeah. There's definitely that element to it. Like you're generally it's when a person is dying and they're taking over the boundary, as you say, to the other world. But there are also psychopomps that are escort. Like I mean, you could say a shaman is a psychopomp,
Yeah.
because he goes to retrieve lost parts of a person. He or she goes to retrieve lost parts of a person's soul, and goes out into the other world again, whatever your definition of that is, and brings back these parts. But the dangers are inherent in the other world are something that the shaman or witch will have trained for, and so they're
Mm,
able to do it it, as you allude to, Kate, some people go too far themselves and without that
mm,
type of training, simply because they're dazzled by it all, I suppose, when you
mm,
start to get into this and you do, the temptation is there to go too far too quickly, I suppose. And with a psychopomp, though, it's a guide. And then, like a shaman or a witch would be a human guide, but as Joshua writes about, the psychopomp can be symbols, it can be spirits, deities, fairy, as you say. I mentioned the story before, I think it was on the last time I was here, and about a lady in white at a local Killeen. A Killeen is where unbaptized babies were buried in Ireland in secret.
mm,
And this lady was thought of as a ghost and something to be afraid of. But really, in that type of guardian role, it
mm,
seems very much like a fairy liminal existence where she looks after the
mm,
souls, spirits of these children, babies, until they can move on to the next level. So psychopomps very much seem to be good, although I don't know whether we can ever use such
mm,
broad or simplistic definitions, but
mm.
certainly they have the capacity, at least if we engage with them properly, to carry us over to the next existence.
That's fascinating, and there is just so many mind-blowing connections going off here because I had two conversations with two separate women this weekend. One was a end-of-life care nurse for children, Um, and the other, her mother had just passed the previous year, and totally separately from each other. One was in the morning, one was in the afternoon, told me pretty much the same tale that the woman whose mother had passed had said that she was seeing children in her room, and literally hours before her passing said, "Don't worry about me. I have a job. I am here to see these children over," which would just blew this woman's mind. She couldn't equate what this her mother was trying to tell her. But the other woman was saying that on not regularly, but on a regular enough basis for it to be clocked by her and other nurses around the world because she looked into the phenomena. Even children as young as 3 were saying that that was their job, that they were seeing children and their job was to help these children pass over with them. And I'd
Yeah,
never come
yeah.
across that phenomena.
It's fascinating, all right. And I suppose it's something that it's it's a psychopomp taking a form that children
Mm,
won't find scary, you know.
yes,
And
yes.
it's funny enough, like that you say that. Around here, not too far from here, there's a mountain called Kilranala Hill, and there's a well, a really old pagan well, which is now dedicated to Saint Bridget. But there's a tradition there. It was a pagan graveyard before it was a Christian graveyard, I should say.
Mhm.
And there's a tradition where the parents of children who are being buried in the graveyard bring a cup to take a cup of water from the well to offer it to the spirits already residing there so that they will look after their children.
Yeah.
It is
Wow.
really, really poignant. And yet at the same time, you go, whoa,
Mm,
like, the fact that that belief is there and brings out something tangible in a
mm,
person will do that, So it goes to show that people will often say, oh, well, is the belief of fairies still there in Ireland? And the people will say, ah, well, they'll be quite cynical about it. The old adage is, I don't believe in fairies, but I wouldn't want to offend them. Uh,
yes.
but, but this is something else. This is like spirits, psychopomps, fairies, as you say. Before we had the term fairy, what were we calling these beings? And
Yeah.
is it that they have all divided, or is it just that we have compartmentalized them based on how we see the world? And
Mm,
I think we're guilty of that. I think there's probably
mm,
a lot more to come in this area, which is why it's such fertile ground. I feel that so many so many divisions, unnecessary divisions, have happened, and we're probably much more connected in terms of the supernatural figures that exist all around us than we think. You know,
yeah.
like I do understand and accept like there are regional variations and so on, the
Mm,
flora and fauna of in an animistic context will be spirits of place that are different in the Antarctic than they are in the desert and so on.
mm,
But it's still the same planet. And once you get outside of the physical realm, I'm not sure that those borders exist in the same way.
I think one of the human conditions that really I think stops the exploration into truth is that we compartmentalize everything, that we have to put everything into boxes because it's a control factor, isn't it? Then, if we've got it in a box, we understand that box, then we stop seeing the nodes, don't we? We stop seeing the connections. And like you with it, these may not be have vastly obvious similarities across the globe. It might just be strands and wisps of motifs that go off. But actually, when you start digging into it, it's like comparing the African savannah and saying, there can't be animals there because they look nothing like a badger. There can't be lions, they can't be animals because we know understand a badger, and I
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
once you kind of try and get over that hump, it's just blown wide open, isn't it? And you
yeah,
can
yeah.
start seeing the connectives.
Exactly. And then you have to take into account our own limited perception in terms of the electromagnetic spectrum and
Yes.
what's out there. Like we're existing within this tiny, tiny sliver, but it goes on and it goes out and it goes beyond anything that we're currently capable of perceiving. And possession wise, though, that does not mean that we can't be affected by
Yes.
these things in the same way as radiation affects us, microwaves affect us.
Mm.
So, of course, consciousness forms, may have, may see us as food, as an energy source, as just a curious type of livestock. Do you know? So
Mm.
it can be scary to ponder that, and I don't think it's far fetched at all, because to think to believe and think that intelligence and consciousness stops with us, it just seems so small minded.
It does. It definitely does. And I mean, from my own experiences and over the years, I am coming to a growing conclusion that I do go to private investigations, paranormal investigations, as well as doing events. And the more and more I go, the more and more I'm getting the same sort of repetitive themes going off that aren't hauntings of spirits. And I'm actually finding that there are more fairy happenings, if you like, within properties than there are spirits of the dead. And when the spirits of the dead are there, it's almost like they feed off each other, and it creates
Mhm.
this negative atmosphere, which is kind of it's a revelation for me. But not so much when you go back into things like before the word poltergeist. You know, these kind of activities would have been blamed on house brownies, sprites, goblins, whatever
Yeah,
they were,
yeah.
sort of throwing things around in your kitchen. So it's not that a million miles away of possession, is it? Or but what I mean, what? Why do you think? It's just $1 million question, isn't it? Why do you think fairies have that particular nature?
I guess, you know, perhaps there's something in this realm that they need us to access to. They
Mm,
need to use us to access, like us putting on a glove. Do you know what I
mm,
mean? In order to pick up a hot coal or something like that. You know, it's not that we're not powerful ourselves with our hands, but at certain times you need something else in order to get you from A to B, if you like. I mean, Claude Lekatu wrote a lot about revenants and so on, and about the disease that they carry because they're dead. Now, in Buddhism, there's a term called remne, and it's basically the same idea, you know, that there's something that's contaminating when something is of the other. Now, when you think of that in terms of possession, it reminds me of a virus sometimes. You could be walking around with a virus, cold virus or whatever, and
mm,
it's affecting you and it's affecting your mood and your interactions. But the same thing is well attested when it comes to the supernatural, the spiritual, that there are these types of diseases. And I don't mean that in a purely negative way. I just mean a force that
mm,
attaches itself or that you stumble into. And again, that would then affect your mood. And it's a form of possession that's not, it's accidental maybe, but at the same time, it's going to alter the way you would normally think. And I think that's kind of
mm,
what the crux of that is. But in terms of why, um, we could say something really dark and say that they're somehow energetically feeding from us. I mean, Kirk in the Secret Commonwealth writes about the fact that fairies take sustenance from animals. And so I would presume that's with humans as well. Like, you know,
mm,
and does that mean, like he mentions taking the blood of cows at one particular point, but when it comes to human beings, again, we're brought back to vampires almost here again. But
mm.
is there also an energetic sustenance that fairies can take from us? It's one of those ideas that people have speculated on.
Mm. Do you think that what do you think that we get out of them? Because we do, don't we? We do have
Yeah.
a very deep relationship, and one that people probably wouldn't even recognize, sort of people generally wouldn't recognize, but we have a very deep connection, don't we, with the fairies? What do we get from them?
What do we get? I think, you know, there's a lot that we get, like in terms of the ritual landscapes, for example, you know, making your crops healthy by giving
Yeah.
offerings, that kind of thing. But I often wonder if something more important is just that knowledge or that proof of the numinous, and that there's something else,
Mm.
and being in contact with something that doesn't obey the rules of physicality, and that shows us that we go on
Mm,
even after death. So there's something beautiful, and that's why they're so beguiling and so charming and so on. There's something beautiful about fairy love, but then there's that darkness as well. And there's cases in Ireland where, sorry, in the folklore archives in Ireland where fairies would bring people to corpses and tell them to cut off body parts and use them
mm,
for spells and so on. And you go, what is that about? And it's interesting because that would have been quite a dangerous thing to write down for
mm,
people. So it wasn't something that someone just done for a laugh. You know, it's something that could have gotten a person into trouble or jailed or whatever, and yet it was important enough for them to write down and have it passed on. So in those stories, sometimes the fairy is I don't know why they're looking for revenge, for example. They may be looking for something that, again, like when we use that analogy of a glove that they can't do in this physical world. It's a bit like why do fairies give people the evil eye and then
mm,
ruin their lives and ruin the lives of people who encounter them? Like what is that about? Again, if you want to go dark, you could say maybe they feed or they collect the energy that comes from negativity because negativity is still a really potent energetic form. So perhaps that's it. That brings you then into again a much darker aspect where people will want to summon fairies, which is never really a good idea. But again, they do so in order to make this trade-off. And again, it's usually something negative. You don't really hear of anything good coming from those types of interactions.
no. I mean, just a thought occurred to me, and I wonder if it's just as simple as they are our untethered selves, aren't they? They are not tethered by, the same morality, values, religion, politics that humans are. And maybe we have that kind of connection with them because they do things that without these constraints that we could possibly see ourselves doing as humans, as animals on this planet. Because a lot of the time we disconnect and suppress ourselves from the animal kingdom, don't we? And the
Yeah.
fairies are that kind of a bridge between us and nature that we have certainly grown away from.
Yeah, yeah, and I suppose you could link into Jung's idea of the collective unconscious there. That
Yeah.
perhaps it's something that's much more, much closer to us than we realize. And at certain times, whether it's that our metabolism allows it or whatever, it just infringes upon us, and it's a wild, it's a whole wilderness of an ecology of consciousness,
Mm,
because it's imagining, because it's the collective imagination of us all as well. You have beings and forms that are awful and horrible, but also beautiful and
mm,
godlike, and just I guess it would be something that goes far beyond our capacity to imagine, because in MacDonald's book, King of Morning, Queen of Day, which is a great book about fairies, and it's three different sections based in the early 1900s, and then I think it's the 1940s, and then the present day. But in the section of the present day, the fairies are changing, their forms are changing because we're learning about computers, we're learning about outer space, we're learning about physics, and suddenly this imaginal, when I say imaginal, they're very real, but they
mm,
exist within this collective unconsciousness almost, and they're changing so much because as we unlock knowledge, they react to that and they
mm.
expand. So these forms that we see, say in Yeats' ideas of fairies and so on, it's very different today. Like as Josh writes in the book, fairies today can be anything, as you say, Kate. Like we're linking now to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, UFOs, previously considered religious icons, and yet you've got this whole mystery still at the heart of it because we're all still going, but what is it and why is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's the very similar concept in Neil Gaiman's American Gods, isn't they? You know that the gods change and fall out of favor for the new gods, and
Hmm.
as we sort of go at a more rapid pace, they change and go at a more rapid pace to sort of keep up. And it's
Yeah,
almost like they have to be a little ahead of us to sort of look like they have some power over us and lead us. There's that element, but it's actually the relationship is the other way around, and maybe it is just coming down to, that silly saying that they only exist if we believe in them. Maybe it is our belief and our fascination and our energy that we put in them that gives birth to them, like a tulpa or an egregore, that
yeah,
then
yeah,
keeps them sustained. And if they don't interact with us in a way that, that we have that belief and that belief system's there, then they just dissipate because they're energetic beings. Who knows?
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
wide open field, isn't it? It's lovely.
Yeah, and you know, but I get completely what you're saying, but then we have to account for sightings that aren't
Yes.
reliant upon us wanting or
Mm,
even imagining what these creatures are. Like, you know, that the famous story in Wentz's Fairy Faith book of the doctor coming home at night and looking at orbs, and then the orbs move in together, and then there are beings inside the orbs doing things. Like, that was so beyond what
mm,
this person, they didn't know what to do with it. Of course, now today we'd say that's a classic UFO encounter, but it's just sat there in this fairy folklore collection,
yeah.
and it's something that's, I don't know. You might argue, oh yeah, it's leakage from the collective unconscious, and it came in, and
Mm,
that's why he saw. But that seems, I don't know, that doesn't seem to work. It seems much more a chance encounter of something wholly other. And this
mm,
guy, a doctor, you know, so he had a lot to lose by even coming out and saying it. He left it out there. What did people think? Like, this is back before the 1940s, like before we even
mm,
thought of UFOs or anything like that. And the fact that the beings are made of light within the orbs, and then the orbs come together, they walk from one to another and then separate again. It's so mad. Like, you know, such an
mm.
amazing story.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, if you think about it, if you were gonna place yourself into a situation where you have a continuous story, say the fairies want that continuous story for I don't know, for their existence or our belief in them, maybe they get a kick out of the belief. You would put yourself in a position where it is somebody who has the ability to be able to disseminate that information out into the world in a way that's ludicrous enough for people to prick up their ears. And the fact that that story still now stands as a curio to a lot of people, it's just stood the test of time.
Yeah,
If you're just continuously showing yourself to rural people who will just talk about it in terms of folk stories around a pub fire, and that just people will go out and collect those stories, but it's the greatness comes out of the absurdity of it, doesn't it? And the
yeah,
people it
yeah.
happens to. So yeah, it's
I
absolutely.
think like John Mack, who was the Harvard psychiatrist who wrote the book of Abduction, I think it was called, and it was basically abduction, possession. Like, you could actually draw a lot of
Yeah.
parallels there. But he talks about the fact that it's not just that it's rural, and as he put it, like hillbillies who see these things or have these
Mm.
encounters. It's just that they have a lot less to lose by coming out,
Yes.
you know, and talking about it. Unlike like the local bank manager, or you
Mm.
know, the CEO of a finance firm or something, because they're just not going to come out and say it
Mm.
until much later, maybe when they retire or something like that. But like, it's interesting when we speak about abductions, especially with possession, because we have a phrase here in Ireland, "away with the fairies," and it basically
Yeah.
alludes to a person who has there's a humorous angle to it, where people will say, "Oh, it's just someone who's very, you know, dim-witted or daydream or whatever." But it actually comes from the idea that fairies would take your consciousness,
Mm.
and so you would be there in your physical body, but your consciousness would be away in the realm of fairy. And there was, with John Mack and a lot of the people that he interviewed in his book, it was the same thing. Like, the UFO experience was very real for them, but they were still in their beds, and they felt it was their consciousness that was being taken. And again, you'd see, you look at the parallels, they're taken to what seems to be a dark place with vague light, small beings around them, uh, objects inserted into them, very much like fairy stories of Australia, for example, where white
Mm.
quartz were pieces of white quartz would be put into the shaman. He would say he was up with the sky people, and then he was sent back down again with new powers. And with with Mac, it was the same thing. These people, even though they were in a altered consciousness state,
Mm.
somehow it had this ability to affect their physicality as well. It's I think what it all says is that our own ideas about what reality is are wrong, or we just don't know it all.
Yeah, we're limited. We're very limited. And one thing you were saying there, and it just came up as another parallel, is with alien abductions, the whole theme of overlaying animals onto the abduction, such as owls, are the sort of the classic one, aren't they? That people say, "Oh, I kept seeing a strange owl,"
Mhm.
and it's that, yeah, that's another motif, definitely,
It
definitely. It's
definitely is. And with I think it's Mike Clelland's book, where he talked about that kind of symbology, and Whitley Strieber, of course, speaks about it, like the classic cover, which he had masked itself somehow as owls. And here in Ireland, of course, you have the Calic, who is like a fairy woman, or it depends. That's a simplistic way of putting it. She's a goddess to some. She's
Mhm,
a sovereignty goddess to others, and she's a fairy being, a supernatural deity to others. But she's
mhm,
very much again associated with the owl, and it seems to be
mhm,
something that, whether it's a deliberate masking or whether it's us not being able to see the whole transcendent form of whatever these forms or beings are,
mhm,
it's interesting that we do try to pick something and hold it up as a representation of it, and then that triggers us. Like with Stryber again, like
mhm,
the owl was very triggering for people after when he speak to people about their own abduction experiences, they would be triggered very much by the image of owl, simply because of those eyes and the way these grey or small creatures had these huge eyes as well, like on the cover of the book.
Yeah, I mean, it really it can't be something that the brain is doing to itself if people from all different scenarios who haven't spoken to each other having this same experience, aren't they, of having this owl? But it does beg the question: is that being overlaid psychologically or
Mm-hmm.
induced in some way,
Yeah,
or is
yeah,
are they actually presenting themselves in a glamour? As fairies would, as an owl, to be able to transition that person um, even if it's energetically, without too much panic, because you're going to panic less about an owl being at your window than you are a buggly-eyed grey, classic
yeah,
grey
yeah,
alien, which would freak you
yeah.
out, basically,
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And I think that, connected to that is the way things are masked and so on. Like you have things like the fairy mist, okay, and we say, okay, it's the fairy mist. But again, it's very much related to fairy possession as well, because it often appears before someone is taken away. And
Mm.
often people will say, they may not remember it all, but they'll say, this mist was so weird, like there were lights inside it, and I could hear bells and voices, and, and
Mm.
it's something that has that capacity. And certainly in Irish folklore accounts, the person will be gone, and then the mist will dissipate, and the person is back. So
Mm.
again, it's one of those mysteries that it seems to traverse physicality and non-material states, all
Yeah.
a dimensional barrier. A lot of people don't like the idea of using a term like the veil, for example. I don't mind using it.
Mm.
I do like it's not like I know the answer. I don't, but it's
Yeah.
just it's a way of showing that separation between the other world and our own world. And again, if a person is taken through the very mist, then you go, when they said they heard sounds, was it something in the frequencies that maybe triggered
Mm.
their consciousness traveling somewhere else? Or is it the light itself, the light frequency? So there are all of these possible answers which are part of that whole mystery.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly going over the whole sound and that kind of thing. And orbs is another one that I want to just briefly pick up on. But that whole sound, it's more and more I'm hearing with other experiences, with cryptid experiences, that people are having frequency sounds like popping or cracking or crackling or high pitch frequencies that we associate with the fairies as well. So people have been speaking up about their experiences with Sasquatch, and saying that when they see them, when they come through, or when they leave their vision, there's this high pop sound that goes with it. And other people have also talked about orbs with these things. Now, anybody who's watching this who's a ghost hunter will be rolling their eyes at the word orbs. Now, I truly do believe in this phenomena. My brother experienced orb phenomena as a child quite regularly. Um, and it's not something that I dismiss at all. But the more I hear from other disciplines about, because people believe orbs, they're just in the ghost realm. They're not, though, are they? They are all the way through all these disciplines. Those two aspects sort of traverse all the disciplines, don't they?
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. I think orbs turn up like from haunted houses to fairy mist to the arrival of, the Fatima being like, there's definitely a correlation there. Just come back to what you're saying about sound. I came across a gorgeous account in the book by James McDougall. It's from the 1800s. It's just recently digitized, but he talks about a woman whose child was taken to the realm of fairy, and she went to try and look for the child, and she heard then it just said there was a sound of a flock of birds flying around her, and when she looked down to her feet, her child was back again. Now
Wow.
that's from the 1800s. Like that's an amazing representation of that idea of the sound somehow
Mm.
being an indicator of some type of barrier or movement from one realm to another. But I just thought it was a really interesting one because we do hear of sound um, being part of that. I don't know why. Perhaps there's much more sound going on than we can actually hear. Like it could be a completely alien sound. Perhaps these frequencies are instigating the experiences, but we can only perceive the lower end. Do you know what I mean? So
Mm.
it's another one of those mysteries.
It is. I'll tell you what I was asked quite recently, and you might be able to throw a bit of light on this because it's something that I'd never thought of, never come across, and asked a few people, and we could only come up with one tentative answer to this. I was asked on a podcast, do fairies have a smell? And it really baffled me. I was,
Well, well, John Keel would say yes, because he said that all of these beings, if you go by Keel's thesis, that these beings will leave a smell of sulfur. Now, does
mm,
that mean that the smell is coming from them? I mean, Joshua Cutchin has written a book about this, all about the smells associated with fairies. By the way, the
so
title of it,
which one,
yeah,
which
it did.
which one is it?
The title of it escapes me, but you can look it up after the show. But
Yeah,
he
yeah.
he definitely has one, and so that idea of sulfur, and Keel said that that was either the smell of the barrier being broken and them coming through,
Mm,
or if we go back to Claude Lekatu, of course, he said that revenants and dark spirits had a smell of disease. But
yeah.
with fairy lore, we don't hear that so much. I mean, there's certainly less. I don't think I know of any that any accounts. In fact, what I do know is that fairies would be offended by bad smells.
Mm,
So that would make me think that there is some kind of separation there, in terms of Keel's idea of specters giving off this sulfuric smell, and fairies who I again I think the only accounts I know of in the Irish folklore archives are fairies being offended by bad smells. So
yeah.
that's an
I
interesting
mean,
one.
maybe it is that chemical change, if you like, rift of popping
Yeah,
through.
yeah,
And
yeah,
again, we're going back to the associations with demonics as well, because it's demonics come through, and that's, people smell sulfur in a haunted house, and it's got to be a
Mhm.
demon. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but maybe it is that because it's such a friction that's caused within the interface of the two dimensions that it does create that smell for us. Maybe they don't have a sense of that smell as they're coming through. I was
No.
pretty disappointed. I was pretty disappointed that fairies didn't come through with the smell of honey and flowers, to be fair, but I couldn't find an account of that either.
Yeah, yeah. But then again, the whole idea of glamour is something that maybe they do. There's an old Irish lullaby called "Where the Hawthorn Quivers," and it's about a woman who is taken to the realm of fairy, and she's describing what initially seems to be a beautiful sight, this other world. But then, as the lullaby goes on, it gets darker, and she's seeing these men in chains who have been taken there, and whether or not it's their souls that are in chains, or the physical selves, it depends on what you think yourself. But gradually, as the song goes on, then she comes to the conclusion that it's all glamour. It's a
Mm.
much darker place than she had been led to believe it was. And at the end of the song, she has to be rescued because it's interesting. She says, if I get stuck here, I will become a fairy myself.
Mm.
So
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
I thought that because we do talk about all the senses, don't we? We talk about sight and hearing and whatever, and it bamboozled me. It bamboozled
actually,
me because
I remember this is the way my brain works. It was on
yeah,
autopilot there, even though Joshua's book is called The Brimstone Deceit.
yes, I do know that, but I'm gonna look it up because I don't like not knowing even a reference point when somebody asks me that
Yeah.
kind of question.
I
But
know,
I
but
love
look,
it.
look, the way it is, the amount of books that we're reading and the amount of information we're taking in, our filing system is just running a little bit slower, but it gets there in
Yeah,
the end.
yeah. Mine's running way slow these days. It's connectives come and then they just go when they're off again. So, and
Yeah,
especially to
yeah,
do with fairies, they're all over.
exactly.
I I think this is probably a natural place to wrap it up, and I would truly love to talk to you about this subject further. I'm holding back. I'm literally holding back the reins because we were getting to that time of year, sort of Samhain to Yule, which for me is a fascinating time with the fairies, and I would love to have you back on to do that kind of whole, um, where they fit in the darker side of Christmas, where they fit in. Obviously, with Samhain, it's the time of the fairies, isn't it? It's the that
Absolutely,
is
yeah.
their time, and I'd
Yeah.
love to have you back and
Oh,
chat
yeah,
sort of on
that'd be
on that
great.
kind of
Yeah,
subject.
yeah. The
Like,
time goes
thank
so
you.
fast when we're talking
I
about this,
know, I
doesn't it?
know, I
Really?
know, and I really could keep you on this subject for such a long time, but I feel my brain drifting into,
Yeah, yeah,
thoughts of Samhain and the connections there, and thoughts of Yule, and I'm trying to rein it back, saying no, 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 that needs to be, in one space. But
exactly.
thank you so much for coming back on. It's been brilliant, and you always make my brain frazzle. I kind of come away thinking of a million and one different things, and just sort of making those connections, which is brilliant. I absolutely
Oh,
love it.
thanks
It's
so
always a
much.
pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you as well, Kate.
Brilliant. Definitely get you back.
No worries
Thank
at
you very
all.
much.
Okay, take it easy.
Bye bye.